And we are recording. Okay.
Oh,
Hello, everyone. It's me, Elijah Avalon, and welcome back to Mystic Meetings, a new series where we interview spiritual people about spiritual things. And forgive me this episode if I sound maybe a little strange. I am a little under the weather, but I did not want to postpone me talking to my guest today, Adam Morningstar. Adam, thank you so much for being here.
it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. When I got the idea for this series, you were one of the very first names that popped into my mind that I wanted to interview because, I've followed you around the internet for a few years now, and I just think that you're a fascinating individual. And so I
Thank you.
really want to hear your thoughts on some pretty hot topics within our community.
Yeah. Well, where
So,
would you start with, like witchcraft or vampirism?
so, so we're gonna start with the witchy stuff.
Okay.
And then we're going to get into the vampirism. I know that that's going to be probably the like hot button stuff for this video that people watch it for, but I want to
Mm,
get through the witchy stuff first.
okay.
Um, these are like obligatory questions that I kind of like to ask everybody on Mystic meetings, and
Okay.
that is, Adam, why witchcraft?
Why not? You know, like it's just even before I fully understood the term itself, I always knew there was something extra there within me. Like
Yeah,
I was raised in a pretty religious household, but there was always that undertone of like natural healing and using herbs and oils. And it was from my mother that I actually learned how to make candles, which, is pretty much the basis of, my professional life.
yeah, yeah. And your candles are great, by the way. The
Thank
link is going to be down below for anyone who wants to check out his stuff, and you should. His candles are great. They're great.
thank
So, okay, you answered why witchcraft with why not?
you.
So, was there ever a time when you thought that maybe there would be some other spiritual path you followed, or were you just kind of always glued into magic in some form?
um, that one's kind of like it was a roller coaster for me, as is with most people. I started looking into Wicca at first, but it didn't fully click with me. So I just started looking more toward like my ancestry,
Yeah,
folk magic, and that really it's very I don't want to say vague, but it's not so as detail oriented and it's not as strict as a lot of like traditions are nowadays. So
yeah,
that felt more like it was something I should do.
yeah. So that actually leads me into a question I was going to ask you about ancestry. Ancestry is a very big part of my magical practice, and it seems to be a part of yours too. And my question is, if your ancestry does affect your magic or your witchcraft, in what ways specifically does it?
Um, I have to say I connect to them more from the discrimination throughout the generations of society as a whole because I'm like mixed with like a whole bunch of stuff, but I feel like I connect more with the indigenous side of my ancestors and from more like the African American side of that family.
Mhm.
So I
And
feel like there's definitely more connection of that than anything else.
yeah, I didn't plan this question, but I'm just curious. For me, when I started working with my ancestors in magic, I realized that there was a lot of my own bias and anger that I had to kind of work through in order to work with my ancestors. But then I
Mhm.
also realized that there was anger and maybe other negative emotions that I needed to give voice to for my ancestors.
Yeah,
Has that been something that you've experienced as well?
it's definitely as far as giving a voice for the ancestors, it's aside from blood relatives, there's also like society relative, like the LGBT community.
Yeah.
So I feel like I've felt obligated to give a voice to both of those what I call families,
Yeah.
blood relatives and the LGBT community. So they
Yeah.
both have always been a big part of my life.
Absolutely. Um, why do you think so many witches are queer? Because it seems like a lot of us are.
Yeah, it's definitely true. I feel like most of us, if not all of us, have grown up not having a voice of our own. So as we got older, we sort of had to break out of that mold, so to speak. And I feel like witchcraft gives us that freedom to do not necessarily like everything that we want, because we should still tone it down a bit. Some people, but it's I don't know. Like I said, that freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that we as queer people are able to express ourselves more freely and actually feel like we are allowed to be spiritual people
Yeah,
in the witch community, which is something we're not told in the Abrahamic communities. You
yeah,
know?
definitely.
Uh, do you think any of the Abrahamic faiths influence your personal practice at all?
um, I wouldn't say it does. I feel like now I'm at the point in my life where I sort of broke free from that.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah.
thankfully.
Yeah. That's hard work.
Yeah. But when I first started, when I was probably like middle school, somewhere around there, I used to get those 7-day candles and use those, but it still didn't feel right for me per
Mhm.
se. So I had to like learn over a period of many years to break away from that.
Yeah. Um, so I mean, I guess through technicality, demons and Satan are kind of stemming from Abrahamic traditions.
Mhm.
But I do want to ask you, do you think that there has been a rise in recent years because of the internet, I think, and
Mhm.
the popularity of the use of demonic imagery and entities in witchcraft?
There definitely has been. I've noticed it myself as well.
Mm,
Um, I just feel like more people are breaking away from what they were taught and they're exploring different avenues of not just spirituality specifically, but philosophy in general.
oh, yeah,
And like because everyone was programmed to think a certain way and live a certain way, I feel like people when they've explored different paths, they like unlock something within them that they connect with more.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, kind of taking us in another direction for a second, covens in
Mhm.
witchcraft. Have you ever been or are you part of a coven?
I had not specifically witchcraft, it was more so vampirism, but
Very
we all like were practicing witches as well, so it kind of like they both intertwined with each other. But that was
so
like years ago,
okay, so you're currently a solitary practitioner then?
definitely.
Uh, so what do you think? Do you think that there's an importance placed on one or the other in our community?
Um, in our community, I feel like the witchcraft community is already sort of like the underdog compared to mainstream society.
Yeah.
But I say vampirism is even more of an underdog within that community because
No
even
joke.
witches don't fully understand about that.
Yeah. So, man, we are blowing through these questions really quick. So we better talk a lot about vampirism. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Um, so in magic, like in your magical practice,
Mm,
you've said that you draw a lot from like ancestry, ancestral practices, ancestral veneration.
mm.
But what other kind of like sects of magic do you pull from? Is it just witchcraft or Wicca, or is it other things?
Um, it's because I'm also into like astrology. So I
Mhm.
work that with the stars and different planetary alignments. I'm not too into that, but it's something I'm still learning.
Yeah.
Um,
So what is your sun sign?
I'm a Cancer.
Same.
Yeah, we
Well,
both are.
don't you think that Cancer is the underdog of astrology? Because I think we are.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we're discredited so much as just being like the emotional crybabies.
I was just about to say that too.
And what's weird is like all the other cancers I've known, including myself, we don't even cry. Probably when we should cry.
I know.
Like
Same
it doesn't
here.
make any sense.
Especially since I've got like 3 Capricorns in my chart. My
Oh
moon is Capricorn, so it's even more difficult for me.
yeah, my moon is a Virgo, so I have that
Oh,
analytical thing in there too. Yeah, oh, it's
that's
ridiculous.
insane.
um, so do you practice divination?
I do tarot. That's my main form of divination,
Mhm.
but I also like to do scrying. I feel like as a water sign, that's
Ooh.
something that comes naturally, is
Yeah,
scrying.
yeah, totally.
But I used to like dabble in other forms like the OM and runes, but I don't really connect with them as much as I used to.
Uh,
But I still use them here and there.
okay. Have you ever done oh my gosh, of course now that it leaves my mind what it's called. But have you ever done the like mirror gazing with like a black mirror or like a
Yeah,
pool of water? Yeah.
I
Do you
have. I
like that?
actually,
Because I find it kind of difficult.
really,
Yeah. Do you like it?
I love it.
Really?
Yeah,
I find it very hard. Cool, that's cool. I do like tea leaves though. I like reading tea leaves.
pretty cool.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, okay, I'm gonna move us over into the vampirism thing because that's really what we're all waiting for. So, uh, first question being, give us
Mhm.
your definition of what a vampire is.
I'd say, in its most general sense, essentially a vampire is a person or being in general
Mhm.
who requires energy. Like they feed on energy to survive and to be healthy.
So, playing devil's advocate here,
Mhm.
how is that different from a normal person? Normal.
Well, using identifying as a vampire is, for me at least, is more of an archetype. So, because technically, everyone, we all like have energy, we all exchange energy, but not everyone is fully conscious of it, and not everyone wishes to identify as a vampire.
Yeah.
Is sort of like any like the difference between someone who identifies as a witch as opposed to just someone who's just spiritual. Like we technically do the same things, but it's more of not just a title, but a form of identity.
Oh my, that was so perfectly said. Like I want that on a pillow. Like seriously, you said that very well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, wow. So, what are the different types of vampires? Because I think that people get who aren't vampires or a part of the vampire community or have studied it, I think they get confused by the idea that like, wait a minute, there are different kinds of vampires. Like, I
Yeah.
think they just assume it's all about like role play and blood drinking.
It's some are into that, but that's not the case for everyone.
Hmm.
The different like main types of vampires, there's the typical energy vampires
Right.
who sort of have been getting a bad rep lately. In the spiritual community, they say, "Oh, don't go near that person. They're an energy vampire," but
I have a question about that. Yeah.
they may not realize that they may actually be one as well. you know.
Yeah.
But there's the energy vampire. There's um, they feed off of like ambient energy.
Hmm.
There's some who feed on sexual energy,
Hmm.
which that's fun.
It's great.
There's also the blood drinkers. They've also been getting a bad rap lately,
Right.
but it's not like in the movies or the books where you have to like bite someone's neck and drink like half their blood or something. It's usually just a little puncture here and there, but you always have to make sure you're doing it in a safe environment. Always.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think another myth kind of to dispel here is that all vampires in the modern vampire community are like dark, depressed, ooky spooky individuals. Like some vampires are very like hyperactive or like very extroverted, very very unassuming.
Definitely.
Yeah, like and they don't all fit within the punk and goth subcultures either.
Yeah, I've
That's a
definitely know
stereotype
a
too.
few.
Yeah. The stereotype is that I think that all vampires must be goth in some way. And
It
that's
makes it fun, but that's not always the case.
right. There's a lot of them, but yeah, it's not
Mhm.
the case.
I
Um,
actually know some vampires who actually feed on the energy from the sun. Like they
mm,
out in the daylight
that's
and
fascinating.
power to them, but you know,
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah.
So, at what age did you start kind of rolling around in your mind this idea of vampirism as an identity for yourself?
Um, as far as practicing goes, I'd say I was very young, probably like 10, 11 years old. But as far as like identifying publicly and coming out about it, I'd say I was more in high school, like 15, around there when I started to accept it.
Yeah. So, w- were literary and film vampire portrayals something that you just always had like a fascination towards? Is that something that helped lead into this?
As far as aesthetics go,
Mm,
yes, that's definitely been an inspiration.
okay. So, what are some of your favorite pop culture portrayals of vampires?
I'm more into, I've never been a fan of the whole monstrous, grotesque vampires. I've
Yeah.
always loved the, tall, suave, elegant type. So I'd say Anne Rice's vampires have definitely been a huge inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, come
Only
on.
Left Alive, like that's perfection.
Yeah, she is the queen of the
Yes.
vampires. You know what I mean? Like what she wrote is just like perfection.
Mhm,
Perfection.
definitely.
So talking about role playing,
Mhm.
which I think does get a bad rap, but also does actively hurt the vampire community in some ways too, from an
And
outside. Um, what are your thoughts on role play in the vampire community?
um, I mean, if you're doing it just for fun, like you just want to go out and have fun, then so be it. That's your prerogative. But don't give the rest of us a bad name. Because,
Yeah,
it's the same situation with like pretty much any group. There's always going to be extremists in every group that gives the rest a bad name. So I feel like it's up to us to sort of, filter that out and just make sure everything is safe for everyone.
yeah. So, okay. So, awakening is a term I think that comes up very quickly when you start Googling like neo vampirism, modern vampirism, real vampires. Awakening as a term comes up a lot. Could you explain to us what that term is?
It's more so just when you come to terms with the fact that there is that, I'd say, spark within you. Like it can happen in different ways to different people. Like you can like taste blood for the first time, or you can be around someone whose energy just opens you up to all of that, all of those feelings. Or it could be, I don't know, you could be watching a movie or a documentary or reading a book, and you can just in that moment you'll be like, wow, like this is what I want, or this is like what I am. It's just something that you just click with, something within you.
So, do you think it's kind of like realizing your queerness? You have that moment where you're like, oh, that's what this is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Um, so let's see. I think I've asked you. Yeah. So just to like talk about myself for a minute. um, for me, I from a very, very, very young age, always
Mm,
had this natural instinct to like pull energy from people.
mm,
And for me specifically, a lot of the times it was like something I perceived as negative in them. I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
take it into myself. And for a long time, I really struggled with like the ethics of that, but then also like the psychology of that. Like, why do I want to take away their negativity? And it wasn't until much later I thought, oh, maybe I'm like a natural healer, and I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to take away their badness.
Yeah.
Um, but as I got into my late teens, early 20s, and I read Anne Rice, which was like a huge light bulb moment for me, um, I still was fighting that. And every time I would start to kind of feel like that was happening, I would try to shut it down.
Mm-hmm.
But it had kind of evolved at that point into like me just taking energy, period. It didn't matter if I perceived it as good or bad. I was just kind of funneling stuff from around me and from individuals. And sometimes it grew increasingly sensual or romantic, and sometimes not.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until very, 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 I think it was December 2015, actually, that you and I had a conversation, just very nonchalantly, and you were like, "Girl, that sounds like vampirism." Like,
Yeah, I
and
remember.
yeah, and I had always fought that title because growing up, I am someone who very much falls in with like the anti crowd of society. And I spent a lot of my early 20s going to like subversive nightclubs. Like I hate to label them, but like punk and goth and vampire clubs. And seeing so many of like the role play people or just the very toxic individuals that would claim that title, I was like, well, that is not me.
Mm-hmm.
But you really, really did help me realize, that archetype, that title, that community is so much more than those people, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And you also helped me realize that specifically, not all vampires are the same. And
Yeah.
we don't all think the same. And we don't all feed the same.
Mm-hmm.
So for
Definitely.
me, and I'm trying to say this in a way that YouTube won't like strike me for it, but but I am someone who feeds on, shall we say, the romantic and sensual energies of a person. But I think we all get what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, in the literary world, there are terms for that, an incubus and a succubus, which is separate kind of from a vampire. So why do you think, if at all, why do you think that type of vampirism that was traditionally not considered vampirism has now become a part of the vampire community of the other energy vampires? Do you think it's just because it is feeding through energy, so it links us?
I think that's the easiest reason why people may identify as an incubus or a succubus.
Mhm.
I feel like again it's more like a sense of identity because it's a title, it's an archetype. You know, I feel like it's the same thing. Like if someone who identifies as a witch, not every practitioner identifies as one, but some may prefer to use that either as a for political reasons, or
Mhm.
for other personal reasons that they may have. And the same thing with just vampire. You know, not everyone who feeds on energy identifies as a vampire, but I personally do because of like my inspirations that I mentioned earlier. I feel like my personality connects with that and it like intertwines basically. So I like to use those terms to describe who I am, whereas someone who feeds either mainly or only on like sensual energy, they may they may or may not identify as an incubus or succubus.
Right. So, if somebody was kind of flirting with the idea of vampirism in their own life, like maybe even right now, they're like, this is ticking some boxes in my head. Are there places that you would send them to kind of start learning about it, like movies or documentaries or books or authors or something?
Movies and stuff, that's always fun, but I wouldn't recommend starting there.
Mm-hmm.
That more as for like aesthetic reasons and all of that fun stuff. But as far as philosophy and spiritual goes, I'd say start with Michelle Bellinger's books.
Absolutely.
She's like top
Absolutely.
notch.
Yeah, she really knows what she's talking about.
Mhm.
Yeah, like the Vampire Energy Codex.
Yes, that was the first one of hers that I read.
Great stuff. Great stuff. And on a non-vampiric note, the Psychic Energy Codex of hers is also really, really, really great.
Mhm. That one was interesting.
Yeah. Um, does vampirism influence your actual physical magic workings at all?
It can. It depends on which specific workings I'm doing in the moment. Like sometimes it also helps when I try to do a spell working for someone. I have to like connect with their energy, and knowing, being knowledgeable on vampirism actually helps with that.
Mm.
And it also helps that I perform Reiki also. So, that's all about energy working. So it's like the trifecta right there.
Yeah.
So it
So,
definitely comes in handy.
are there vampire gods?
Um, I feel like they can if you want it to be, because I feel like goddesses are constructs of a person. Like we both can just create a god right now while we're speaking.
Yeah.
It's egregores. It's all about energy work. So anyone can create a deity at any moment they want.
Uh,
But as far as like in the movies where like vampires like have to like read a certain Bible or like worship a certain god, like that's definitely not the case at all.
okay, that's fascinating. That's a fascinating answer. So the ethics, I think, are something that people really get caught up with vampirism. Ethics and
Mm.
morals. I don't want to blanket us and be like, are vampires ethical? But for you, the individual, do you have a code of ethics in your vampirism, or is it just like a free for all?
I I do consider myself ethical, but I
Mm-hmm.
consider myself an ethical person, not specifically ethical vampire, because it
Yeah.
all comes down to just respect others' boundaries. Consent is very important, whether it's like you're doing something physical or spiritual. It's always good to
Especially,
get the other's permission.
yeah, especially if you're a sensual vampire, folks. Okay,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
because we're not trying to get jail time here.
Yeah.
So, so do you think that there is like, you know how in Wicca, like traditional Wicca,
Mm,
they have the Wiccan Rede, right? Which like all Wiccans follow and agree upon, right? That
mm,
that they're going to harm none and do what they will.
mm.
Do you think that there is a moral base that all vampires do follow? And if not, do we need to be concerned about the immoral vampires out here in society?
I feel like we should be a bit concerned because there's it's up to the individual. Like there should be a code of ethics that we all generally follow, but I feel like since everyone's so different, like I mentioned earlier, there are going to be extremists out
Mhm.
there who are going to mess it up for everyone else.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like there's only so much we can do about those people, because there would always be that contradiction.
Yeah. So, you know, we've all heard the term an emotional vampire, someone who just walks into a room and just like, ugh, like just sucks all the energy in a room, and it's like very toxic. When we meet those types of people in our lives, because I think we have all met those types of people who just really kill the buzz in a room and just like really drain you emotionally, you're like, oh my God, this person.
Yeah.
It draws to me the images of the show What We Do in the Shadows, right? Right.
Yeah.
And, oh, I forgot. Is his name Phil? What's the character's
Like
name? Tom?
Colin,
Colin.
Colin,
Wait, what's his name?
Colin, like Robinson, I think it
Yeah,
is.
Colin Robinson. That's it. So it calls to mind of a person like that. And we've all met that person. Do you think that the individuals who are out here roaming around being a Colin Robinson, um, do you think that those are like unawakened vampires, or do you think that those are just maybe people who have exceptional spiritual gifts that are kind of asleep? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see like both sides of the situation. Like people who may have that potential of being a vampire, who are unawakened, can definitely be dangerous. But I also think some of them just don't care.
Yeah,
Some who are awakened and just love to drain people.
yeah,
There are definitely those like selfish people who practice vampirism, who are just constantly draining others with no remorse.
yeah. Do you have any like tips or suggestions if someone has a person like that in their life? Like it could be their own parent, someone that they kind of are going to always come in contact with, who is this like emotional drainer of energy. Do you have a tip for someone who's going to have to be around people like that?
My best advice would be just do pay more attention to your needs first before anyone else's.
Mhm.
And if you can, just try to distance yourself from
Yeah,
that person or those people, like as much as possible, and just do your own thing, take care of yourself, drink plenty of water,
yeah,
stay hydrated.
yeah. I think for me, uh, in learning to distance myself from those kinds of people in my life, there was a person in particular in the past that I identified as that kind of a person, and I always felt really bad, really, really bad, like physically bad, every time I would leave their presence. And for me, it was recognizing like the verbal cues that they gave me that they were starting to kind of put me in that spiral, because they
Mm-hmm.
always started to like talk about a certain set of like things about them that I realized were like verbal cues for me, like, oh, they're starting their process now, of just like draining me.
You
And so
notice.
I feel like once I recognized their patterns of how they started that feeding, whether they were conscious of it or not, it helped me avoid that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely helps when you start to become more aware of their patterns.
Yeah. So when it comes to relationships, like at what point in a relationship do you disclose that to a partner? Because being a witch or practicing magic is one thing, right? Because that's just seen as spirituality or religion. That's like a just a it's just a top layer thing. But I
Mm,
think that vampirism is something much much deeper and
mm.
shocking to a person.
It
And
can be.
like, at what point do you share that with someone?
For me personally, like everyone's different, but personally, I usually like to disclose that in the very beginning, like at least just to let them know,
Yeah.
whether they would like to be a donor or if they're open to having the vampire in question have another donor,
Hmm.
because having a donor doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a relationship with them.
Right.
You could be in a committed, closed relationship with one person and still have a donor on in the back.
Right. 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 Okay. Okay. So just like use your intuition
Mm,
on when to disclose it with the individual.
yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Um, Bringing it back to witchcraft kind of for a second. Do you think that, excuse me, do you think that witchcraft is like inherently a pagan thing?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
because there are other paths out there that practice witchcraft and they may not necessarily call it witchcraft. Like I mentioned before, my family, most of them are religious, and like they'll be damned if they call themselves a witch. But essentially, a lot of what they do would be considered witchcraft to most people today.
Right. Right. Yeah, I live in Alabama. So I
Mm-hmm.
grew up with a lot of like that old South like folklore and like folk medicine, where like if you get a headache, You put a banana peel on your forehead.
Yeah.
If you have neighbors that you don't like, you cut an onion in half and you rub it all over your windows.
Yeah.
Like, and that's very witchy stuff. But my mom and pa would not say that that was witchcraft at all. At all. They would scream if you called that witchcraft. So
Hmm.
I totally get that. uh, so vampirism is more like, do you think vampirism is inherently a spiritual thing, or do you think it's like a secular thing?
It can be both. Some people see it more as a secular situation.
Mm-hmm.
For others, like myself included, I'm able to like have it intertwined with my other paths of spirituality. So I do see it as a spiritual practice.
Okay. Now this is kind of like a complicated question, and I didn't write it down for me to like have it worded perfectly. So I'm going to try to convey what I mean.
Okay.
But I think me being a queer person really put a blockage in me when it came to working with my ancestors,
Mm,
because I thought, well, what if they're homophobic? Like, what if they were horrible homophobic people, right?
mm,
And so for a long time, that kept me from working with them. And then also as a white person, I was like, what if they were all super racist?
mm,
Like, I don't want to work with that.
yeah.
So that was my own shadow work that I really had to get through for a while.
Mm,
But then when I introduced vampirism, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but because I think a lot and I
yeah.
overanalyze. But I remember thinking, like, are my ancestors even going to want to connect with an individual who is so blasphemous from their world point of view? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that brings into the question, are ancestors who they are for forever? Or do you think that they become more enlightened individuals when they pass? Uh, I mean, that's a loaded question with a lot of loaded answers, but if you would kind of start to break into some of that, that'd be great.
I've actually thought about that before. I don't have all the answers, but
All right,
from my
none of us do.
opinion, I feel like they don't stay like that forever. I
Mhm.
feel like they're like that in life because that's how they were taught. And, environmental situations, people often are products of their environment
Right.
and with different traditions. But I feel like when people pass, it's just you become pure energy. So you sort of have that like intuition basically of the truth to things. You may not know everything once you die, but I feel like you do become more open to different situations.
Interesting. Interesting. You know, in building my own family tree, it's something I've really gotten into in like the past year.
Mm,
I have found these, photographs and newspaper clippings and all this stuff about ancestors that are like multiple generations back from me. And I think some people maybe listening to what I'm about to say might cringe at what I'm going to say and be like, that's not PC. But I think that as a queer person, it's very easy to kind of like pick up on someone else's queerness just through their being.
mm,
And there have been a lot of photographs that I have found and a couple of videos of more recent ancestors where I can't help but think that those ancestors must have been queer.
It's
And
possible.
yeah, and there's one ancestor in particular who is about, I think he is 7 or 8 generations back from me. So we're talking about a long, long, long time ago.
Yeah.
Well, there's like a big chunk of his journals that are surviving, which is like awesome.
Mm,
And in reading some of his stuff, he was a very spiritual person. He was a reverend,
oh wow.
but in it, he talks about like, drawing the energy from his congregation and how that is what gives him life and that is what gives him spirit, and that is what keeps him healthy.
Hmm.
And he writes about that a lot, and I couldn't help but think, great grandpa, I think he was a vampire.
An ambient feeder.
Yeah. I just found that fascinating, and finding things like that helped me break down my own psychological barriers with working with my ancestors as a queer person and as a vampire.
Yeah.
So if that's helpful to anybody, go find out the truth about your family, because it can be very eye-opening and reaffirming to your own identity, you know?
No.
Yeah. Especially since, like, not to shade our living family, but family does sometimes like to keep secrets about things and rewrite history.
Yeah.
If you can go back and learn the real stuff, it's fascinating.
It is. It truly is.
Yeah, it's very affirming. So is it possible, this is such a cringy question, but I want to ask it because I know people are going to ask it. Is it possible to turn someone into a vampire?
It's not like it is in the movies, in fiction, where you bite someone and it's like you implant a virus in them and then like, become a vampire out of nowhere. But I feel like you can help someone awaken to what's already there. That's
Yeah,
like the most
yeah,
basic definition of that.
yeah. And I thank you, Sarah.
No
Yeah.
problem. And I'm honored to be part of your spiritual journey.
Oh, yeah. Um, okay. So short answer is no, you cannot. And the way that they mean by asking that question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can are real vampires, are they hurt by any of the stuff that we've told hurts vampires then in fiction?
Not really. I mean, the whole stake through the heart, you put a stake through anyone's heart, of course they're going to die. I mean, you chop off the head and burn it, of course they're going to stay dead. Like,
Yeah. So if we're not hurt by sunlight, why do you think that so many vampires do really enjoy the night and almost kind of feed on the night? Because I know I do.
as far as the sunlight goes, there are some, like myself, I have what's called solar urticaria, which means I'm actually allergic to sunlight. Is the actual UV light. Like if I'm out for more than a few minutes, I'll start breaking out in hives,
Mm.
and like, it's bad. It's sort of, I always explain it. It's sort of like a food allergy. When you get like itchy and then you like break out everywhere. That's how I get when I'm in the sun. But that's of course not the case for most people who identify as a vampire. But I feel like, to answer your question, I feel like more people are more in tune with the night because there's like more free energy. During the day, like everything is hectic outside. And if you're more of an introvert or you just like to practice when there's like more silence outside, then I feel like that's why people usually wait until midnight or sundown or even after midnight.
Mm. Yeah, with the whole like silver sometimes with werewolves and vampirism being an allergy, I myself am allergic to pewter, aluminum, nickel, and silver. So
Wow.
I'm allergic to all what is considered all low grade metals, and I have an allergy to certain high grade metals like steel and silver.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so I just think that that's a funny thing, like we can discount so much of like the fictional vampire, like we do with the fictional witch, because they are largely just fake. They're just fiction.
Yeah.
But I think that some of those interesting little quirks do seem to appear sometimes as personal truths for individuals. And that
Mhm.
always brings me great joy. Like with you with the sunlight, and with me with metal. I just think that's very interesting.
There's always like some sort of truth in each fiction. Like everything comes from somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so winding us down because we're getting close to our end mark. Also, apologies if you hear my cat, because he is literally trying to climb a wall and fall back down and climb again. So
Yeah, my That's actually trying to get into the room.
Um, said before Michelle Ballinger was a great resource for up and coming or curious vampires. And
Mhm.
I totally agree 100,000%. Where would you point someone towards witchcraft in general if they were wanting to get into it? And I mean specifically like teenagers. Because adults, we're pretty adept at getting our own resources, and seeking things out. But I think about when I was a kid, I really didn't know where to start. So, what do you say to kids, like young teens, young 20 somethings who are interested in witchcraft?
I'd say like one book in particular that I really loved going through when I was younger was Silver Ravenwolf's Solitary Witch, because it's like a thick book and she talks about a whole bunch of different, traditions and practices in there. And she goes like deep into like different like tarot and different divination practices and traditions like Egyptian. She talks about, I think she mentioned like Greek deities. So that was very fascinating for me to read.
I feel like you can always kind of clock a person's generation by if we grew up with Silver Raven Wolf or not. That's something that I'm not sure that the young Gen Z understands, how influential she was on us.
I know.
Yeah. She was everywhere. She was my gateway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It was To Ride a Silver Broomstick was my first foray into
Oh
magic at
yeah.
all. Yeah. Yeah. I would also throw out a book that was so huge for me called The Mystic Foundation by
Mhm.
Christopher Pinzak.
Yes.
It's amazing.
I love his books.
Yeah, me too. He's so great. And that book has so many different types of mystical paths, not just magic, not just
Mhm.
witchcraft. So if you're really just searching and figuring out where you fall, if at all, in the magical and mystical religious realms, a great book to start with.
It is.
Yeah. So, yeah, okay. So we're getting to our time. So,
That
lastly,
was fast.
so besides Michelle Ballinger, is there anything else that you would say to the young aspiring vampire?
I'd say just do your research. Watching movies and books is fun and everything, but just try to find out like who you are as a person first and then explore to see what connects with you and what you like and don't like. And if you disagree with anything what other people may agree on, like don't feel bad for speaking up about it. Don't
Absolutely.
be afraid to be the black sheep amongst, the other sheep,
Perfectly said. Perfectly said. How would you suggest, though, last question, how would you suggest that they even start practicing as a vampire?
I'd say just energy work. That's like I mentioned earlier in the video, we all operate on an energetic level. So I'd say just start there. Like if how well can you connect with others' energies? How do you feed on energy? Like how does it energize you basically? Like do you when you're having intimate situations with someone, do you feel alive or do you just feel normal about it? Do you feel even drained? Because the person you're with may be a vampire and you don't even realize it. So I'd say
Yeah,
is be aware of not just yourself but your surroundings.
that's great advice, Adam. Where can everybody find you online?
I'm usually on Facebook. You can just search up Adam Morningstar or even just Instagram. I have a Twitter, but I'm not really too active on there. So I'd say your best bet is Facebook and Instagram.
Okay. And your website, right? House of
And my
Morningstar.
website, mm-hmm, houseofmorningstar.art.
It's great. It's great. Everyone should go there right now.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you do also offer tarot readings on there, right?
I do, yes, on the
Yeah.
website.
Yeah. Yeah. about it myself. So before we go, I just wanted to know, how did you even get your name, Adam Morningstar?
I was just one day I was just doing research when I was younger, and I was looking up about the goddess Venus because
Mm-hmm.
he's associated with that name, with the title, basically. So it always just clicked with me. I've always felt more like romantic energies with Venus, and she can be a warrior too. Like, don't get it twisted. Like, she can be pretty fierce. So I just always love that because everyone associates Venus with just feminine energy, but I feel like she embodies both sides, and I've always loved that. So I just chose the name Morningstar.
It's so funny you bring her up and about her duality, her hidden duality, because
Mhm.
that was brought up in the last Mystic meetings. Jasmine she went on for a minute about the duality of Aphrodite and Venus, and about how Venus is like secretly this like badass bitch. Like
Yes, definitely.
awesome. Adam, thank you so, so much for giving me your time today.
Yeah,
To
thank you for having me.
I really, really appreciate it. I truly do.
Thank you.
And I want everyone to go follow the links down below. Follow Adam, check out Adam's work, buy stuff from Adam. And thank you so much again, Adam. And thank you everyone for watching, and stay blessed and stay healthy. And bye bye.